Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and revenge is a dish best served cold, which makes vichyssoise the most retaliatory of soups. I'm joined on this episode once again by New York Times and USA Today best-selling author David R. George III. David is the author of many Star Trek novels, including tales set in the original series era, Deep Space Nine, and the Lost Era Adventures of the Enterprise B. He also blogs about cinema and baseball at his website, drgii, that's 3.com. David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Aaron. It's always good to be with you.
It's great to have you back aboard. And today we'll be talking about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, the second feature film of the Trek franchise. With the dawn of the 80s, science fiction cinema was completing its evolution from low-budget B-movies to box office-topping blockbusters. With the success of the first two Star Wars films and a third in the works, the major Hollywood studios sought imitators and worthy competitors to the galaxy far, far away. Paramount Pictures, who had released Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979, was keenly aware of the growing trend of space-based adventures at the Cineplex, but they were just as aware of how much they had spent on their last attempt at a sci-fi event, and the lukewarm reception that the film inspired. So they turned to Harve Bennett, a TV production expert but a Trek novice, asking him to develop a new adventure for the crew of the Enterprise without the help of series creator Gene Roddenberry. While struggling to produce a script, Bennett turned, in turn, to Nicholas Meyer, a neophyte writer and director with no knowledge of Star Trek. Even Jerry Goldsmith, the lauded composer of the first film's iconic score, would prove to be out of the production's budget, leading to the hire of 28-year-old James Horner, whose experience was then limited to scoring Roger Corman films. Trek received an infusion of new blood, and in doing so, accomplished the unlikely task of creating an iconic and successful film that redefined what Star Trek would look like and feel like for the rest of its existence, while remaining recognizable to fans as a tale about duty, friendship, and wonder. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, David, it's great to have you back on the podcast, and it's been a while since the last time that we spoke. And there have been some big changes in the movie industry since we last spoke. I know that you're a cinephile and that you write reviews of films on your own. What have you thought about what the movie business has been going through in these last 2 years of the pandemic?
You know, it's pretty fascinating. Hollywood seems to be one of the few industries that got it right pretty early on in terms of production. There are, I think a lot of the unions, starting with SAG, require vaccines for people to perform on TV shows and in movies. Right. They have mask requirements. People are getting tested 2, 3, sometimes 5 times a week, just to make sure that productions don't shut down. Obviously this took some time to set up and to figure out, but at this stage, maybe a year into the process, maybe 9 months, I think Hollywood just sort of in general started to kind of get it. And so these rules are in place now, and they seem to be working. Productions are not getting shut down the way they were at the beginning of the pandemic. And so presumably they'll start to be more output, because it's obviously been a lean couple of years in terms of film distribution. I mean, some things were on the shelf that were supposed to come out in, say, 2020, and they got delayed to late 2020, early 2021, mid 2021. But now we're finally starting to get some output of things that have started to be produced since the pandemic began. And so, and it has been a lean couple of years. I think you only have to look at, for my money, you look at the Academy Award nominations the past few years, and it's been pretty lean on high quality. And I think that's not a reflection of quality across the board. I think it's a reflection on the quantity, because in order to get some really, really good or great films, you need to produce a lot of films, because it's almost impossible to produce even a bad film. It's virtually impossible to produce a good film. And it just takes a lot. And it's not that there aren't good or great films out there in the last couple of years. There just aren't as many, because there aren't as many films in general. And so obviously good and great films have taken a hit as well.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Oscars are coming up, and they've been making a lot of changes to the Oscar broadcast and what they'll be featuring on the broadcast. A lot of the technical awards have been removed from the broadcast, and there's been some outcry over that. And it's, I've never thought of, obviously, the film and TV production is sort of monolithic in that it's always there. And I think one of the reasons that they were an early adopter and a solid adopter of these reforms is that there's so many things that you have to do in a production, and it has to operate on schedule, and the industry really did that, executed that in a good way. But when it comes to things like the Oscars, it feels like they're always sort of struggling to, I don't want to say remain relevant, because we all love movies and TV, but the viewership for the Oscars keeps falling, even as more and more films, more and more inventive films are praised and receiving awards. And I wonder what the disconnect there, if people just don't really care to watch the Oscars anymore, or why the Oscars feels like it has to keep shaking things up.
I think there are a few disconnects, and I think it's also a matter of sort of practicality in the sense that, or reality in the sense that the television viewership has fractured dramatically. It was fracturing even before the start of streaming. But now with in addition to premium services and cable services, you've got Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and all of these streaming services. And so viewership, people can watch things when they want and how they want. And a lot of times that isn't locked into a network channel at a specific time. So I think it's facing that hurdle. Of course, for the last, it's not just a couple of years during the pandemic, it's even years before that, Oscar viewership had been going down. Yeah. And again, part of that's the fracturing of the television landscape. But I think also, it's weird to me because, as you know, as you've said, I'm a cinephile. I love film, but you always hear huge complaints about how long the broadcast is. It often goes, 3 hours, 3.5, 4 hours. Look, to me, this is the World Series of Hollywood. I love movies. Let it be 5 hours. I don't care. I want to sit. I want to see it.
Sure.
I don't play the actors off. Don't play the directors. Play the writers off. Nobody cares what they have to say. But the people we know, let them talk. I want to hear it. I don't care. But I apparently am unusual because people always complain about how long it is. Plus, every time I watch an Oscar broadcast that I think is really great, when I read the reviews of it the next morning, I find out that I was terribly wrong and it was horrible. Yeah. And every now and then when they say it was a pretty good Oscar broadcast, I'm thinking, nah, that was terrible. So I don't know. I just, it's a shame too. I think the Oscars, not just the broadcast, but the Oscars in general are facing some trouble because not only is television viewership fracturing, but people can watch in part because of the pandemic. People are watching more things at home sooner because things are being released in cinema the same day that they're being released streaming. And with the pandemic, there are plenty of people who say, you know what, I don't need to risk my health to go out to the movies when I can just watch it on HBO Plus or whatever, HBO Max. Yeah. So I mean, there's that hurdle, and I think people are getting, because they can watch anything, TV, movies, anytime they want, virtually. I think they're getting used to watching things at home, and they've got big screen televisions, and they can make an experience not quite the same as being in a movie theater, but closer than it has been. And for me, I like being there with an audience. I like sharing that, having that communal sense of wonder or humor. It's much easier to laugh at a comedy when you're with other people who are laughing. Yeah. It's just better. It's more enjoyable that way. Yeah. So it's a struggle all around too. And on top of that, in the last couple of years with the pandemic and fewer movies being produced, the quality is down, as I've mentioned, and so there's not the urge to, okay, let's go watch the Oscars. There are so many great movies.
Yeah.
So it's a whole bunch of factors.
Yeah. Despite everything that happened last year and the pandemic still being a factor, one of the things that I really enjoyed about 2021 was the ability to watch Warner Brothers movies at home on release on HBO
Sure.
Max. That was very, very convenient. And I watched probably more for that reason Warner Brothers films than I would have. And then, kind of like you enjoying the Oscars, and it turns out it was apparently a disaster. That was kind of a disaster for Warner Brothers. Like, they're never doing that again. I don't think that
Yeah.
really fit into what they were looking for as far as the returns and their model. So that's unfortunate. It seems like the focus is still going to be on theatrical releases. And like you, I absolutely agree. I love seeing movies in the theater, and I would hate for that to be something that we couldn't do. And I think that investor, or I guess I should say customer confidence is returning because people are going back to films. But I have to admit that I have not seen quite as many films as I would have in a theater, just simply because of concerns and also just getting up and having to do it. I think the next movie I'm going to see is probably The Batman, either today or tomorrow. But otherwise,
Mhm.
when a movie comes out, I'm kind of thinking maybe I can wait for that one to come to home video.
Yeah, certainly at the start of the pandemic, well, a lot of theaters were shut down,
Yeah.
but even when they reopened, it was with fewer showings. And for the first time in my life, or the first time certainly since I was a kid, I went more than a year without going to a movie theater, and
Yeah.
that just felt strange. It just because I love movies. It's just. And I've only been a handful of times, in the last half a year or two, and partly there's not a lot out there that I want to see, but also it's again, there are these hurdles now with the pandemic and all of that, so it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I hope cinema can recover, theatrical the theatrical experience can recover, because no matter how big a TV you have, it's still not the same as the big screen, and it's not the same as being with a lot of people and experiencing that in a communal way.
Yeah. Out of the films that you have seen, do you have any Oscar picks for this year's ceremony?
I have not seen all that many films,
Yeah.
and so I will make Oscar picks, but I'm not prepared to do it right now because my knowledge is not there. But there are a couple of films that I've seen that were interesting. Don't Look Up, which was a Netflix film, and I actually saw it on Netflix, was a really interesting film that pretty much skewers American culture and maybe world culture in general, but in particular, the American political scene in the last, forever, I guess.
Well.
But that was a really interesting film. It was hard to watch. I mean, in a way, I would say I hated the film, but it was terrific.
I think I understand.
It was hard to watch because I've been living it. We've all been living it. So in that regard, it's like, oh, this is a great documentary. Of course, it's not a documentary, and it really is tremendous satire. Another film that I actually really enjoyed was The Power of the Dog, which is a very low-key film, very subtle. It's Jane Campion, who's the writer-director who's made such fare as The Piano, and she's an Oscar winner. Actually, she's the first female director to be nominated twice for an Academy Award, which is just appalling that she's the first. And she's a great director. And this was it's a slow burn of a film, but it's really, the thing I liked about it is that it's really grounded in reality. It's grounded in emotion. That's what I like about film. I actually like slow, talky films. I don't have a problem with that. I like films that do something to me, that I want my artistic experience to have some substance. You can make me mad. You can make me laugh. You can make me cry. You can make me feel uncomfortable. Just do something. And there was a lot to that film. Again, it's a slow burn of a film, and I don't know that I guess it doesn't even ever really ignite. But I just felt it was kind of like a literary film, I would say, and I enjoyed Benedict Cumberbatch and Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst. Yes. I enjoyed their performances, and Cody Smith McPhee was excellent as well. So I haven't seen too many other films. I have to admit, although I will watch it now in its entirety, and although I love Denis Villeneuve, I had a hard time with Dune. I did not make it through it. Did not make it through it the first time around. So I've got to make another pass at it. Did you watch it through?
I did, yeah. And it, I mean, we knew this was coming. We knew that there was going to be a part one and a part two, but it really does feel like you mentioned literary before for Power of the Dog in terms of its approach to character. This was more like a book in terms of its approach to narrative, where it's all set up. And so they did get that second film, and maybe as I view it, both parts of it kind of together or in consideration with each other, it'll be more satisfying. But it does, it does drag a little bit.
It was, and again, I like slow talky films. I don't have a problem with that. I like political films, but Dune, Dune as a novel was, if you'll excuse the expression, a dry read. And it felt like the filmmaking, though, in the part that I saw, and I will go back to it, as I said, but the part that I saw, it was a beautiful film, spectacular cinematography and just beautiful production design, but it also still felt not just dry, but almost antiseptic. It didn't, I wanted it to draw me in, and it just didn't. I felt like, oh, I'm watching a movie. And that's, and that was the truth, but it wasn't, as you said, satisfying. So, but I have to give it, I'll give it its due. I'll watch it now. Was it nominated for Best Picture?
It was.
I think I think it was. So, I'm going to give it another go.
That was another film that I felt like maybe I was losing something by. Again, it was on HBO Max, watching it at home, and if I had seen it in the cinema, maybe I would have appreciated more.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's the kind of, it was like a Lawrence of Arabia kind of thing, right? Where it does benefit from that spectacle. It's weird because some films, my whole life I saw, one of my favorite films, as we've discussed on other podcasts, is Citizen Kane. Easy to run that one up the flagpole and get it saluted. But it's, in my eyes, a great film for many reasons, not the least of which is how groundbreaking it was in so many facets of filmmaking, but just standing on its own, it's a great film that really still holds up. I had seen it, I don't know, a dozen and a half, 24 times in my life. But the first time I saw it on a big screen in the movie theater, which it was playing at a local art house in Los Angeles, it made me cry for the first time. Oddly, seeing it blown up made it a more intimate experience. And I can't explain why that is, but it did. I saw Gone with the Wind on the big screen after having seen it many times on television. And it was a spectacle. I always knew Hattie McDaniel was good, and she won the Academy Award Best Supporting Actress. But seeing her on the big screen, she steals virtually every scene she's in. She's spectacular. That nuance of her performance is lost on the small screen. And oddly, though, there are some films, another of my favorite films, It's a Wonderful Life, which you and I were going to talk about on Crafty Services at some point.
It hasn't happened yet,
Hasn't happened yet, but that film, I had seen it, I don't know how many times, saw it on the big screen, exactly the same. No change whatsoever. Of course, I'm a sap. Every time I watch a movie, I think I start crying sooner and harder. But it was exactly the same experience. So it's strange how big screen, small screen can be different for some films and not for others.
Yeah. Well, when I got in touch with you and told you that we were talking about the films of Star Trek on the show this year, you said that you'd be interested in talking about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. As one can imagine, a popular choice for many fans, and of course, a very different experience seeing it on the big screen as on the little screen. Why particularly did you want to talk about Wrath of Khan today?
Because, for my money, still the best Star Trek feature. And also my favorite. Those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand.
Sure.
Because I like some crap, but this was a terrific film. I think Star Trek II stands out as a Star Trek feature for a few reasons. One of them is that you don't really need to know Star Trek to enjoy this film. I think this movie came out 15 years after the episode that inspired it, right? Space Seed
Right.
Ricardo Montalban was 67, I think. So 15 years later, in 82, this came out. I'm sure there were plenty of 15 and 20-year-olds who'd never seen Space Seed, who didn't know from Khan, and there are probably I think people. I don't know how many non-Star Trek fans ever saw this film, but I think if any who did, it's a completely understandable story. It's rooted in very, very human elements. The fear and angst of getting old, which is what is at the heart of Kirk's dilemma. As the film starts, they never say that it's his 50th birthday, but it's always felt to me like that was the big number, 50, and which is it was around Shatner. Well, I guess Shatner was a little it was right around Shatner. I guess 82 Shatner, and I guess then they shot it in 81 probably. So he was maybe 51, but that it felt like that with the character. It added up. It added up with his age in the original series. So. Him facing that, his own mortality and mortality in general, having to, deal with loss among his friends, having to deal with a son he never knew. Some of these things, like the son we never knew about, is it's an old Hollywood trope. It's not Star Wars notwithstanding. It's not necessarily a common science fiction trope. It's more sort of almost soapy in a way, to have the long lost son. And I remember initially the first time that I watched the film, I remember sort of resisting that, but I actually think it's really a really good touch because it just humanizes Kirk. It makes Star Trek less about spaceships and aliens and phasers and time, space travel and all of that, and more about just the human experience. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's Star Trek when it's at its best. And it loves, Star Trek, of course, loves to talk about grand themes about racism and inclusiveness and diversity and all of these great and very important things. But talking about not wanting to get old, it's kind of a smaller thing, but it's in all of us. And it's very accessible. So yeah, I mean, and I obviously, or maybe it's not so obvious, but in preparation for this podcast, I rewatched The Wrath of Khan, and I hadn't seen it in a couple of years. And I didn't sort of know what to expect. Obviously, visual effects have come a long way. And actually, even filmmaking techniques, there's such a reliance on just quick cuts, short scenes. Movies typically proceed at what would be considered a breakneck pace compared to movies from even 30 or 40 years ago, as The Wrath of Khan is. I was surprised to watch and see how leisurely the story sort of unfolded. I mean, it really does. There are some very, very long conversations in the film, as films go, certainly these days. And but it worked. I mean, it worked for me. I just, again, the film being rooted in humanity, the emotions of it, they're all completely understandable and accessible to the everyday person, a Star Trek fan or not, science fiction fan or not. It's just all there. The rest is sort of just the trappings of Star Trek, the trappings of science fiction. And I've always sort of subscribed to science fiction being what at least when I looked it up, the dictionary definition of science fiction is, which is fiction that deals with the effects on people or societies of real or imagined science. It's not about the real or imagined science, it's about the effects on people. And that's what's most important. I mean, I don't really care about explosions unless my house is exploding. I'm good, I'm good with not having to deal with explosions. That's fine. I don't, all of that can look cool and can be great, but I again want to be pulled in and affected in some way. And after having not seen this film for a few years, and after having watched it multiple times over the years. I didn't know if the end would have as much resonance for me as it had previously. It's not going to be a surprise. Not that ever was really a surprise, but because that news was out there, for an old, but it did. It affected me. It's such a relatable experience to lose somebody close to you. It's dramatic, and and I thought Shatner and Nimoy did a really good job. Shatner in particular, when his done the funeral scene at the end, when his voice cracks, it just kills me. It kills me. It feels very real. Yeah. And in some sense, it probably was real, thinking he was not going to act with his friend anymore.
Yeah.
At least not in Star Trek. Yeah.
Right.
And still, did he know.
Still friends at that point, or at least on the upswing of their tumultuous relationship. It's interesting that you would mention the dialogue and the staging. Meyer, I think when he came on board, was in a similar place and had similar feelings as to what you expressed, being more concerned with the human drama and less with the sci-fi, not really being much of a sci-fi fan at all. And his background was in theater. I think that he had been a stage actor and had been involved in that, and so brought that aesthetic to the film. The way that it's almost staged, some of the scenes are staged like a play in parts, and the long bits of dialogue, even the long pauses, the use of silence and kind of negative space, especially when Kirk is contemplating, meeting his adult son and thinking about his life gone by and where he's headed. All of those things make it so much more engrossing than, like you said, just lasers and explosions. I also just wanted to say that the editing really contributes to that as well. Bill Dornish was the editor on the film, and allowing those moments to play out, but also using a lot of very quick and sort of inventive edits just for a film that's coming out of the tradition of the late 70s or early 80s. I always think about the moment near the end after we know that Spock has left. He has repaired the engines, but he is in a lot of trouble, and they think that they're out of danger. And there's the beautiful sequence where the Enterprise is rocketing away from the Genesis explosion. And Kirk is thinking, all right, we did it. We're okay. And he looks over to Spock's chair, and it's empty. And he immediately realizes that everything is not okay. And as he runs down to engineering to see, what's happened, we cut back and forth with that beautiful music by Jack Horner between the formation, the tumultuous birth of this new planet, and Kirk racing to see his oldest friend die. And it's just like, it's a genius sequence that you would not expect from, a kiddie movie like Star Trek.
Right. I mean, it really is. And I think there's so many things you mentioned in there. They're absolutely right. And actually, the sequence where Kirk realizes Spock isn't there, before he realizes he's not there, he calls down to engineering to say, "Good job, Scotty." Yeah. And McCoy says, "Jim, you better get down here."
Yeah.
And without knowing why, he didn't say anything about Spock. Kirk looks to Spock's station and sees that he's not there. How does he know? I mean, he knows, he can hear in McCoy's voice that there is something terrible that's happened. And in his mind, something terrible that, the first thing that springs to mind is something that happens to his closest friend. And, but you're right, so many elements in there. I think you're absolutely right about the editing. There's a sequence there at the end where they're trying to get the engines back online, and there are a series of shots that push in on Kirk, that push in on Sulu, that push in on Spock, all the different characters, and the camera movement. It's just edited in such a way that it's just a beautiful sequence, and the whole film is just edited extremely well. And the music is very evocative. It just really underscores or scores the whole film. It really does tie it together. It's tremendously dramatic stuff, and I mean, it also makes use of the Star Trek theme, and I think the film benefited from Harve Bennett not being a dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fan, from Nicholas Meyer not even knowing science fiction very well. I think that helped because that drew them. What drew them to the story was this human element we've been talking about. And Nicholas Meyer, you refer to him as a neophyte writer, but I don't think he was at that point. He had written a novel called The 7% Solution, which he had then turned into a film for which he won an Academy Award screenwriting Oscar. So but he really did make this a film about the stuff he knew that he could relate to, even if he couldn't relate to Star Trek. And that's okay, because Star Trek isn't really about the spaceships. The spaceships and the alien societies allowed Roddenberry and his writers this Jonathan Swift type of storytelling, in that they could talk about the Klingons when they were actually talking about the Chinese. They could talk about the Ferengi when they were actually talking about American business. And Jonathan Swift talked about the Brobdingnagians and the Lilliputians when he wanted to comment on British government. So Star Trek has always been that. It's always been about not the trappings, not everything that wraps it neatly up, but about, as we've been saying, the human experience. And this is, in a sense, The Wrath of Khan is a small story because it's not about saving the universe. It's not about saving Earth, right? It's not about really saving anything. It's trying to, yes, they're trying to preserve lives and beat back this threat, but it's a very personal threat to Kirk.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's more intimate being that sort of smaller story, and I kind of like that. Not everything needs to be, a universe-threatening event in order. Yeah. For one thing, obviously, it makes it less believable when every movie is about, oh no, is Earth in danger again? The entire Earth? Oh no. Oh, the whole Federation, the whole galaxy, the whole universe. Yeah, okay, give me this small, intimate film in which Kirk is worried about getting old. And oh my goodness, he can't use Retinox 5. He's got to use eyeglasses. These are really human moments that a lot of people can relate to. And you know what is something that's also really nice about this film, and it's something that's good about Star Trek when Star Trek's at its best. It's funny. There are a lot of very comic moments in it, and not cornball moments that feel earned. That the characters, these are who these characters are. This is, it's almost it is a little cringy when you hear McCoy say "you green-blooded inhuman" because it feels racist. But you also know that McCoy's heart is not racist. So, but there is quite a bit of humor in it when Saavik takes the ship out from space dock under Spock's command, and Kirk looks like he's going to have a heart attack because this trainee is going to take the ship out. There's so many nice little touches in this film. I like when Spock says, "Be careful, Jim," when Kirk and Saavik and McCoy are going to beam down to Regula, and Spock says, "Be careful, Jim," and McCoy says, "We will." Yeah. just lovely.
Yeah, giving McCoy gets more to do in later TOS movies, but he has a presence in this one for sure. It's interesting that Meyer would obviously go on to help write the script for Star Trek 4, and then of course write and direct Star Trek 6, and he always maintains that that idea of getting to what's going on in the characters' hearts and minds and making the humor relevant to their characterizations. But the stakes do vary between these films. Like you said, if Khan kills Kirk and then he's got a Genesis missile, how big of a threat is that to the galaxy? I don't know. The fourth film, obviously there's a huge threat to Earth if it's destroyed by this probe, and the the threat in the sixth film is more of an existential threat. If the Federation president is assassinated and these sort of darker deep state elements take over, it will definitely mean something bad for the galaxy at large, but not necessarily something catastrophic. And so I like the fact that he can maintain those kind of personal themes, but still expand or contract the scope of the threat that the characters are facing. It shows a lot of versatility, I think, from him as a writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And I think he had a lot to do with the Star Trek II script, though he's not credited.
Certainly. Yeah. When Harve Bennett was brought on to develop the film, he had worked in TV mainly, and the producers behind the film, who included some really big names like, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg at that time, kind of young executives themselves, said, we spent $45 million or $45 effing million by some accounts. Can you make a movie for less than that? And he's like, where I come from, we can make 5 movies for that amount of money. So I've got the job. And he developed, at first, I think they had rejected the Roddenberry pitch. Roddenberry had pitched an idea that the Klingons would use the Guardian of Forever to stop the JFK assassination, which seems like it'd be a good thing, but is bad for Earth. And that was too expensive, and Paramount was not interested in that. But Bennett came up with an outline where Kirk would be in a similar situation to the film. He would be trying to investigate a rebellion on a Federation world, and en route he would reunite with a woman that he was in love with and learn that her son was one of the leaders of the rebellion. But upon getting to the planet, he would realize that this figure Khan was really behind the uprising, and he would join forces with his son to fight Khan. And not being a real Star Trek fan, but being a TV guy and being a dedicated guy, Harve Bennett actually binged watched all of TOS in preparation for this. And out of all the episodes he saw, he thought that the character of Khan, and specifically the performance of Ricardo Montalban, was worth revisiting, that this could be a character that would be a strong villain, which he felt like Kirk would need in opposition to something more esoteric like V'ger in the first film.
Right.
And to that end, he got in touch with Jack B. Sowards, who was a Trek fan and writer, to develop the script. And so certain elements start to come in. Sowards introduces this idea of this terrible weapon called the Omega system, which would become Genesis, of course, later. It was actually the art director, Michael Miner, who suggested that maybe the Doomsday weapon should be something different, because a Doomsday weapon doesn't seem like something that Starfleet would want to develop. And so the idea of a terraforming device that could be used in a dangerous way was replaced the original weapon idea. But a lot of the elements, the idea of having Captain Terrell and Chekhov being his first officer, going to Ceti Alpha 5, being kidnapped or sort of having their ship taken over by Khan was all there. The character of Dr. Savick was eventually introduced. It was later Theodore Sturgeon, the veteran sci-fi writer, would submit an outline that suggested that Dr. Savick would be a woman, and in his original draft be half Romulan and half Vulcan, something that I think is still sort of fan canon, but has never really addressed in the films themselves.
It's lightly addressed, right? McCoy says in The Wrath of Khan, after Savick leaves the treble lift in which Kirk and McCoy are standing, McCoy says, "Wonderful stuff, that Romulan ale." Actually, first he says, did she change her hair? And
yes.
Who commented on her hair says, hadn't noticed. And then McCoy says, "Wonderful stuff, that Romulan ale," which suggests that, okay, she's Romulan. And, she plays it, the actress, Kirstie Alley, plays it like she's not at least a typical Vulcan, if a Vulcan at all, right? And it makes sense that she's more Romulan, because you can see her emotions, even though she stays pretty staid, you can see her emotions on her face. And it makes more sense that she's a Romulan or at least half Romulan. At least to my way of thinking.
I think Meyer played to that in his script and in his dialoguing for her as well, because I was reading The View from the Bridge, his memoir, where he talks about his experiences on Star Trek, and he was talking about how, finding Kirstie Alley was a coup for them. But also watching her play this, being a comedic actress, he sensed the sort of deadpan in her, similar to the way that Leonard Nimoy would deliver a lot of Spock's lines, and thought we need to really play that up. And I like that characterization of Saavik. I also like Robin Curtis, who replaces her in future films. But Robin Curtis, of course, chose to go a totally different way, a more sort of emotionless kind of Vulcan way. But yeah, I like that kind of wry protege of Spock, who's maybe picking up the good things, but also some of the bad things from Spock as she learns to be an officer.
For me, it was a smart choice to introduce new characters and younger characters, because just thinking as a writer myself, and as a Star Trek fan, Star Trek needs new blood all the time, and if it's going to survive, and so that seemed like a good idea. It's interesting. Ricardo Montalban's performance is, both in Space Seed and The Wrath of Khan, first of all, consistent, which is nice. To play these two parts 15 years apart, and yet he maintained his consistency with it, and he is tremendously menacing without resorting to yelling or tremendous fisticuffs or anything like that. He's just he's capable, because he's got a superior intellect, is what I hear. And he just did a great job with it. And what's a really interesting part of this film? It's an artifact of the script itself. The fact that William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban never shared a stage, they're never in the same room. None of the Star Trek characters are. I mean, you've got Chekhov and Terrell, but other than that, really no Enterprise crew ever come in contact with Khan in a real way. It's all view screens and audio channels, and which is really interesting, because I don't think the first time I ever saw this film that necessarily dawned on me. It wasn't something that stuck out as a flaw in the film, not to me, and actually it still doesn't. But it is interesting to notice it, because you would think, okay, so I guess, and I don't remember. I read The View from the Bridge, and I've read plenty of stuff about The Wrath of Khan. I don't remember right now whether or not this is true, but it seems like it would be true that William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban, Leonard Nimoy and Ricardo Montalban, none of them ever. I don't even know if they even ever met.
Maybe at the premiere. Yeah, I don't think so, because he was shooting Fantasy Island, and they had to work around that. So he was in demand at that point.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
So it was all done separately. Yeah.
How would he do? I don't remember. I don't know if I ever knew. How was it enticing him to reprise the role? Was he gung ho for it, or was he reluctant, or was it just, okay, this is a gig, I'm doing it?
I think that he was initially reluctant. I had seen an interview with him where he talked about the fact that, he's at this point, they're, I think, 6 seasons into Fantasy Island. Like, this had been his job. He'd been doing this for a while. And so they approached him, and he thought, well, a movie would be interesting. I don't know if this is, do we need to go back to this character? When he originally read the script, I think he felt like the part was too small for him. And there wasn't enough time with Khan. But as he read the script, he realized that Khan loomed large in this. Whether or not he had a lot of screen time and the film focused on him, people were talking about him when he wasn't there. He was a threat and a presence in the film, and that attracted him, I think, to it. And then once he began preparing for the film, he himself went back and watched Space Seed and thought about how to start building this character and seeing him putting the character back on, but also transforming the character. Khan in Space Seed is very self-assured. He's very calculated. He is in control, or he seeks to gain control of the situation that he's in. And he really fell in love with the idea of once Marla McGivers, his wife has passed away, that he has become obsessed with vengeance. And Meyer, gave him a copy of Moby Dick and said, everything you need is in here. You are Ahab, Kirk is the white whale. And so that's sort of like the direction that he went in.
Well, and that's brilliant. And I want to talk about that literary aspect of the script. But before we do that, I will note that you gave the Kirk reading when you said Marla McGivers, to which MacGyver said,
"Oh yes,
MacGyver, sir, MacGyver, sir." I was sort of, her presence in the episode was interesting, and I sort of, part of me wishes she was in the movie, which would have changed the nature of Kirk Khan's need for vengeance and all of that. And what they did was great. And I'm glad they acknowledged her. I mean, we're presuming that she was his wife, although they never got married in Spacey. We presume she was the one. She went with him. So, the whole literary bent that Nicholas Meyer put onto the script, and he does this again in The Undiscovered Country, Reaching for Shakespeare. Sure. Let's Let the Dogs, all of that. I love the whole Moby Dick. It's great, and he's got. When you look at the books on the Botany Bay, when Chekhov sees the seatbelt, which is on the cargo carrier. Okay, let's not get into that. But yeah, I mean, you see the shelf of books, and you see Paradise Lost, and you see the classics, and of course, in Spacey, they established his Khan being well read, well steeped in the classics, and so it was not a reach. It kind of felt like a reach to me in The Undiscovered Country when you've got Klingon saying, you need to read Shakespeare in the original Klingon. That's okay. You're winking at the camera now, but it felt completely natural for Khan, who knows literature, who is educated, who is incredibly smart, to have these references handy. And also, he's at a point in his life where he is, presumably they were living on SETI Alpha 5, which had been laid waste they were in desperate conditions and never necessarily expected to escape. And when the opportunity arises, okay, and now Kirk is a part of it. Okay, here's time for vengeance. I can avenge my wife, and for the character to reach back to Moby Dick, from hell's heart I stab at thee, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. It completely worked for me. Yeah.
There's also the non-explicit but kind of suggested ideas of literary anti-heroes in your Edmond Dantes or Satan from Paradise Lost.
Sure, absolutely.
A character who is wronged and is seeking redress in that way. Yeah, it's very steeped in sort of a literary tradition and illusion, and I think it would. I'm trying to think about TOS. I mean, obviously everybody on TOS is well read, but this probably really kicked off the use of literary illusion in Star Trek that would continue going forward. Anytime anybody's referencing Moby Dick or they're referencing some work of Victorian literature, you probably have Star Trek 2 and Nicholas Meyer to thank for that.
Well, I mean, actually, in Space Seed, right, you've got literary illusion in Space Seed itself. Kirk says, "Do you read?" Who do you read? Who was it? It is better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven.
Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. So that also remained. It just. I don't know that inspired Meyer. I doubt that it did. I think he was already there, but it's nice that it's consistent with. And again, this can feel very contrived. Putting this stuff in there, it can feel like just the writer loves Moby Dick, the writer loves Paradise Lost. That he forces it into the script, but here it actually works. It feels natural because of the people involved. We're talking about these literary illusions. We need to talk about A Tale of Two Cities too. The best of times, the worst of times. 'Tis a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before. 'Tis a far better resting place I go to. Brilliant stuff. I mean, it really, really works. And I'm trying to remember if we saw Kirk reading. He had books in his cabin. And I think there was always a suggestion in the original series And again, this is a time of rudimentary television in a way, right? It's not certainly the really detailed, nuanced, completely detail-oriented television that we have today. And so even just having books in his cabin on the Enterprise in the original series tells me something.
Yeah.
And I think was intended to tell me something. And I thought it was great that in The Wrath of Khan, a gift that Spock thought was appropriate for Kirk was a book, and an antique book at that. To me, it's just sort of a piece. This film works. I watched it again, and it worked. It still works. I didn't feel like the visual effects were too dated because I thought they were actually very, very beautiful. It's, do some things look like they would be done better today than 40 years ago? Absolutely. How could they not? I mean, the image of Enterprise below the asteroid and then panning up to see yes. Reliant next to the space station. There's a little problem of scale, but it's still okay. It's still okay. And the thing is, the story is not about the effects. So because you're so grounded in the story and in the characters, it just works. It still works, and it still moved me at the end. It still got to me, and again, that's what I want from the film. And so, Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is my favorite Star Trek film still.
Yeah.
However, it's also one of my favorite films. It's not Casablanca, no. It's not. It's a Wonderful Life. It's not Citizen Kane, but it's a really, really good. It's not a great film, but it is a very good film.
Yeah, it succeeds in elevating, what could be just a popcorn film to something a little more, but also fulfilling that idea of being exciting and engrossing and having high drama and dudgeon. You mentioned the effects, and they are. They're kind of future-proof, most of them. They're incomparable, not necessarily in that they can't be surpassed, but they're just done in ways that aren't done anymore. Of course, the climactic battle in the Mutara Nebula, like some of the techniques that they use were just so unique and original. And sure, now they would be probably done in greater detail in a computer simulation or something like that. But having those models, having the ILM used water dyes, clouds of color, in a tank that they filmed in slow motion and then composited the ships in, and just doing those things, it just gives it such a character that might be improved upon or at least expanded upon by having, hundreds of CGI ships, firing lasers and stuff like that. But it's just so that the sort of the claustrophobia, not only of the ship in the setting that Meyer wanted to capture, but also that confrontation at the end where it is, one of the best submarine battles that is not underwater, that we see in the climax, is that perfect game of cat and mouse between these two foes.
Exactly right. That sense of claustrophobia is palpable. And in fact, at one point during that final sequence, Kirk is sitting in the command chair on Enterprise, arms folded across his chest. It's a very, it's again, it's all of a piece. And the visual effects, look, I think I prefer that those were models. They look physical, right?
Mm-hmm,
they don't look like somebody, and not that there's anything wrong with digital effects. Obviously they can be great, but I don't know, there's a physicality to Enterprise and Reliant, and also just having another starship that doesn't look exactly like Enterprise is a great thing. I mean, obviously it makes it easy to distinguish the two ships from a filmmaking standpoint. When you have two ships on screen, you want to be able to know which is which, and this is a good way to do it. But it is such first of all, is a logical alternative this design of a Reliant, it just made sense that that could be a Federation starship.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're seeing the two ships in that sort of submarine type setting in the Mataro Nebula, and I will forgive the fact that Khan is so smart that he only thinks in two dimensions. Okay, you know what? It still works. It still works.
Yeah, it's Kirk's seasoning that wins the day for them.
Exactly right. Well, and Spock was the one who suggested too. So
and Kirk doesn't have a Spock. Yeah, that's right. Or Khan doesn't have a Spock.
He does not. So it's just all around a good film. I was happy to watch it again. It wasn't. I wasn't bored at all. I wasn't looking, when is this going to end? I really just enjoyed seeing it again, and I'm sure that will be the case the next time I watch it too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a fantastic film, and it just seems. I mean, it's 40 years old now this year in June, and it just seems to get better as it goes. And it's incredible that, we've been talking about its beginnings, or the people that originally worked on it were not necessarily steeped in Trek and were trying to bring something new. And of course, that didn't necessarily mean that they were able to totally throw themselves into the production and have something right away. It went through 4 or 5 drafts, and with the addition of Meyer, his perspective was just, well, look, I'll tell you what, just give me all the drafts. I'll get my legal pad out and we'll make a list of all the things that we like about every draft, and then I will just try to turn a draft around that has all of those things in it. And he did that in around 12 days. For no pay, apparently. I'm not sure if he was compensated in some way later, but he is not credited as the screenwriter and did not get paid to do it. But it was important enough to him to get it right, and also as the director of the film to find the direction of the film. That I just think that's incredible that he took these disparate elements and made what he did out of it.
Well, and to do it, as you said, in 12 days,
which is
staggering accomplishment. I mean, it's always easier, or at least for me, it's always easier to rewrite than write. But to cull all of these elements, these disparate elements from disparate scripts, wow, and pull it all together in a way that is cohesive, in the way that The Wrath of Khan is cohesive. And it's also, it is, as I said, it's such a little story in a way, because it is, as you said, claustrophobic, right? It's really only about a few characters. I mean, yes, you've got the Enterprise crew, yes, you've got the Reliant crew, but really it's not about them, no. And there are little things, Kirk being an admiral again. I mean, they tried to deal with that in the motion picture and didn't succeed really that well. The motion picture, I mean, they talk about focusing on visual effects at the cost of not having enough character. But they didn't have to dwell on it. But the fact that he was an admiral and, McCoy tells him you'd rather be out there hopping galaxies. It's enough of a character detail to add to his starting to feel old, because it's his 50th birthday or whatever birthday. And, these just little things. I mean, having Savik, having Spock, being a mentor, a teacher, a trainer. And actually interesting too to find Spock's never taken the Kobayashi Maru, which means he never tried to be a captain. I mean, he has the rank of captain, but he does not have the position of captain.
Yeah.
So at least not starship captain. So it's all very interesting. All of these little details which they don't dwell on really add up. And there's some nice foreshadowing when the simulator is destroyed in the beginning, and Kirk comes off the bridge after having talked to Savik, and Spock is waiting for him, and Kirk says, "Aren't you dead?"
Aren't you dead?
I mean, yikes. It was. But also then, when Kirk takes command of the ship, when Spock says, "Look, we gotta go to regular one," you take command. He says, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. That's where that first happens, and it's just beautiful foreshadowing for what happens at the end.
So, yeah. It's so internally consistent, and it's a credit to Meyer as a writer, also drawing in these disparate elements, because he didn't, invent the Kobayashi Maru or the idea of the no-win scenario. That's from a previous draft, but seeing it as how these would all go to the main theme of the film, not only Kirk feeling like he's old and incapable, but having this charmed life and never having to really suffer sacrifice before, and then being able to set that up. And, they threw Spock's fake death in the scenario, the Kobayashi Maru scenario earlier on, because it had leaked out that, Spock might die in the film. And so they were trying to kind of tease the fans. But having that just set up as a mirror to what happens later it's just incredible.
It really works. And I remember I loved this film from the first time I saw it. Is pretty much just about as much as I despise the follow-up. Because as a fan, I did not want Spock to die, but it was handled so well. It was such a beautiful story that really did justice to both his character and the character of Captain Kirk, that I just thought, okay, this is okay. This is good. And then we have the search for Spock. The end of The Wrath of Khan ends with, it ends with Spock's disembodied voice saying, "Space, the final frontier." But before that, we end with Kirk given a captain's log, and he says, what does he say? He says, "I feel all is." He says, "All is well." Right? He's upset that he's lost his friend, but it's in the shadow of new life, as he said during the funeral, and he's got his son.
Catharsis.
It's all of this, and he says, "All is well." The end of The Wrath of Khan, all is well. The beginning of the search for Spock, I am troubled. Oh, wait a minute.
All was well.
And I feel, I understand why they did it. I understand why Nimoy wanted it. I get it. But I have always felt that the search for Spock, bringing Spock back, devalued his death. And it really, for one thing, it gives this science fiction fantasy element to Star Trek that it hadn't had previously, which is, if you're dead, you're dead. But not so much. And I, as a writer, as a reader, as a viewer, I prefer deaths to be permanent, right? I was devastated by Spock's death, but wouldn't be as devastating if I knew, he might come back. And so not only does it devalue the death of the character of Spock, it devalues anybody else's death, because you know what, they might come back.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I kind of think of it as, in a world like this, once in a while, only sometimes something like this can happen. I think about in Lord of the Rings, like the death of Gandalf the Grey and his return as Gandalf the White. And, if Gandalf stayed dead, that would have been really tragic, but we have the reuniting, with the character when he returns. And so I guess I'm okay with that. Meyer agreed with you. He also wasn't necessarily hot on killing Spock, but that was something that he had to synthesize into his script. And he thought the same ththing. He thought, if we're going to do it, then let's do it the best we can. Let's kill him the best. And was totally satisfied with what they did. And of course, as the early returns came in, and the idea that maybe Nimoy didn't hate Star Trek movies, maybe he would do a couple more. They went in with a reshoot, and shot these scenes of the coffin on the Genesis planet, and Meyer refused to be involved in that, so they did that without his help. I think in years past, Meyer has looked back and said, Spock is a fantastic character. It's great that we had more movies and more stories with him. And so maybe ultimately it was the right thing to bring him back. But at the time, I was not happy about that.
Yeah, I get both points of view, but it was just such a mean, they did it just about as well as you can do it. I mean, it's really interesting when you have deaths on TV shows, and Star Trek is part of this.
Mhm.
Um, like you get the death of Tasha Yar in The Next Generation. Well, lo and behold, she's left a recording for everybody so she can talk to them after she's dead. Really? Do people really do that? I suppose. I like. It's interesting. I mean, they gave Spock this heroic death, which really worked for the character. But
Yeah.
sometimes, I'm completely good with that. But sometimes heroic characters die for no good reason, and not because they're saving the ship or whatever, which is also dramatic. But I don't know. Again, this part of the problem with the search for Spock, in addition to bringing the character back, is that the movie. I know we're talking about The Wrath of Khan, but the search for Spock to me feels like a step backward for Star Trek, not just because they undermined the beautiful ending of The Wrath of Khan, but also because there are many parts of it that play out like a cartoon almost.
Hmm.
Krug, the Klingon commander, having the vicious pet on the bridge of his ship. I don't know. It just,
Right.
it felt, yeah, more comic book than that to me than drama. And it's really interesting too, because what Nick Meyer does in The Wrath of Khan, he plays a little. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Not a lot. There's some smoke and mirrors, but it works beautifully because, like, what does Spock do to save the ship? You have any idea?
He sticks his hands inside an air conditioning vent or something,
Yeah,
and a light shines in his face.
Yeah, sure. My point exactly. They didn't, and this is really interesting filmmaking to me. They didn't feel the need to explain what that was. They talked about radiation, right?
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
saw the chamber at the beginning of the film, so you knew it was there. You didn't know what it was. You didn't
Yeah.
care. And now it turns out Spock's going to go in there. Of course, it's not hermetically sealed, so I don't know about with Spock enters with the revolving door. But okay, whatever. But he goes in there. He puts a couple of gloves on, takes off the cap. No, don't do that. Why?
Yeah.
Okay, so he reaches in and makes a couple of adjustments. Okay, first of all, do we really think that there's something that can physically be altered like that on a starship that will fix the warp drive? I mean, it's so preposterous if you examine it, but there's no need to examine it because it just works in the moment, and it works better. It works better without explanation.
Yeah, yeah.
Explaining it would have pointed out how ridiculous it is. Not explaining it means it's not important. It's like when you have a story, I said I've written 18 novels, among other things, and a lot of times the discussion with my editor is, what's the MacGuffin, right? What's the thing that sets it in motion, or what's the thing that turns the story on its head? And it doesn't, in some sense, matter what it is. It just needs to work, and it doesn't really matter what Spock did. What matters is that it worked. We saw the ship was in danger. He did something. He fixed the glowing air conditioner, and then everything was good, except he died because of it. It works. That's all you need to know. And there's a little bit of that throughout the film, of just smoke and mirrors without explaining things or talking about it. Things just happen, and it works. So. I think Nick Meyer is certainly. I actually think that because I've seen the 7% Solution. I obviously saw The Undiscovered Country. I don't know what else he's done, but of those three films, The Wrath of Khan is really the high point.
I think it shows a lot of restraint for him to know there's just some things that you don't have to explain. I read that, like, obviously we've talked about The Tale of Two Cities and its sort of illusion in the film, and he didn't want he knew that the audience wouldn't necessarily know every single character and plot line from The Tale of Two Cities, but he knew that everybody knew the first line of that book and they knew the last line of that book, and that's all that they really needed to know, and what was incorporated. As we get near the end here, we were talking about literary illusion and literary elements, and the idea of having a foil is interesting, and I think is present in this film, and that is that I feel like David is a foil in some way for Khan. You know, Khan's on a quest for vengeance, and in a way, David is as well, and he's kind of a counterpoint to Khan. He's somebody who was also abandoned by Kirk in a way and has incredible resentment for Kirk, but because of both his inherently good nature and also seeing Kirk in positive action, seeing the kind of man that he really is, he realizes that he was wrong to hate him, and he forgives him and lets go of his vengeance in a way that Khan is unable to.
It's really such, and this surprised me watching it this time, to realize that it's actually, all of that is such a small part of the film, and it sort of loomed larger in my memory. But I feel like they, obviously for obvious reasons, they didn't really realize the character of David Marcus, or David Kirk, in the future, but he really did serve the purpose that you just talked about in The Wrath of Khan. He is a counterpoint to Khan, and I, it's my impression that the film basically says he didn't know Kirk was a smuggler, and I don't know. They didn't really give a hint that he was suspicious of these. I mean, Kirk says to Carol, "Why didn't you tell him?"
The impression that I got, and I was debating with my girlfriend about this, and I was also trying to read in supplementary literature what the intention was. And what I got out of it was, my impression was that you didn't tell him was him saying, you didn't tell him why we're not together. Because the later conversation between him and Carol is that, he says, I did what you wanted, I stayed away. And she talks about wanting him in his world. So I imagined David growing up, knowing vaguely that his father was a Starfleet officer, and himself being a very anti-institutional, he's very wary of the military co-opting science and that sort of thing. And his resentment, over this absent father becomes focused in the character that he imagines Kirk to be, which is shattered when he meets the real Kirk. Now, I don't know if I can back that up, but that was kind of my interpretation.
But that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that interpretation of the Kirk and Carol conversation, but that works too, And we do know that by the end he does know, whether he knew all along or suspected all along or didn't suspect all along. It's still, he knows at the end, and it works. It works. It's a moment of in this terrible moment of loss, and sort of amidst this midlife crisis, and it's just all of this for Kirk. That moment in his cabin with David really works to just say, "Hey, it's all right. It's going to be all right." I mean, it's not like David is his best friend now, and he's his son, and they're going to pal around, whatever. But it's like Kirk has lost his closest friend, but he's gained his son. Whether or not David knew, now David is acknowledging it, and you can imagine that their relationship is going to not be, non-existent going forward. And there's all of these, all of these pieces fit together in a way that really it's Kirk's movie. Spock dies, and that's tragic, but this is really Kirk's movie. It's his story. It centers first and foremost about his desire to get back out there, and also his concerns about growing old, feeling older. It's everything sort of centers around that. Even Spock's death, it centers around what's inside Kirk, and that works for me. I think it's, in a way, even though it isn't true of every scene, and it isn't sort of true of the narrative in general, it really is the case that Kirk is the point of view character here, right? It's just everything is with respect to how it impacts him, from Khan's vengeance to his son's resentment. His moments with B.B. Besh's Carol were also very nice too, and I like their dissenting conversation, why, I did what you wanted, I stayed away, and why, I wanted him in my world. You weren't going to give up your world. I wasn't going to give up mine. I wanted my son in my world. And, but also, she's like, tell me what you're feeling. You've seen your grown son now, and he says, old, worn out. And she's like, well, you want to see something that will make you feel new is when the world was young. Or young is when the world was new. And it just, I don't know. There's a comfort level between the two of them, despite their estrangement, despite what's happened between them. And that really works. And I credit Bibi Besh for that. And I thought she did a good job in a small role, but an important role.
Yeah. For a movie that was written by people who were not super familiar with Trek, aimed at least in part at audiences who didn't or wouldn't have to know necessarily a lot about Trek, there are many moments in the film and in the dialogue that are short little exchanges that draw upon either what you know of the characters or what the film has already told you about them. Just great bits of dialogue. You mentioned before him talking to Saavik in the elevator, and that whole sequence from when she comes in and they're talking about what he did on the test, and then McCoy comes in, who's been holding up the damn elevator, and she leaves, and then the kind of like just the patois shorthand between them with the Romulan ale, and it's just, that's fascinating. And then he gets the call that Carol Marcus is calling, and he tells him, don't open up old wounds. And it just, we go through 3 or 4 different switches in mood and tone, all in the space of 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and it just shows like this great efficiency for dialogue that keeps the whole script going.
Yeah, absolutely. If I was asked to recommend a Star Trek film to a Star Trek fan who had seen none of them, I would say The Wrath of Khan. If I was asked to recommend a Star Trek film to somebody who knew nothing about Star Trek, I would recommend The Wrath of Khan, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
At the base of it, I think it's a good film. But really, for Star Trek fans, The Wrath of Khan is it honors the characters. It is the characters are consistent in it with their television origins, and from a non-fan's standpoint, as we've discussed, it's completely accessible.
I know many film fans who aren't Star Trek fans, but are cinemaphiles who love the Star Trek movies and Star Trek II in particular, simply because of the stories they tell and how well they're done.
It is good storytelling. It really is. And again, it's rooted in that human element, in those aspects of humanity that so many of us can relate to, if not all of us. Let's say most of us. But really, just the notion of getting older and losing people in your life, and not being able to fulfill your desires or your purpose and all of that. It all works.
Needing glasses.
needing glasses. And even that little touch where Kirk picks up the glasses at the end because and the one lens is broken. I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
I'll maybe a little on the nose, but yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah. And you know what? For some people it wouldn't be on the nose, right? But it does work, as it's that. And I thought that was just a lovely touch, even though it was a bit of a sledgehammer. Yeah, I liked it. But interestingly, even the way he just tosses the glasses onto the table, just sort of, it is emblematic of his mindset, of his emotional state at that point, and it just works.
Just the disgust and the disappointment. It would be easy for, a modern director to say, you've been holding it in, now you're alone. This is where you could, flip the table over or throw the book across the room. But just like, he just threw the glasses down. It's great.
And, another aspect of this is that William Shatner did a fine job in this film, as did Leonard Nimoy.
Yes.
He really did. People make fun of Shatner, and I get why, and I get why.
He's got his excesses, but
the guy, and you know what? He was very restrained. I think he's at his best when he has a confident director.
Yes.
And I think he absolutely had a confident director in Nicholas Meyer, and he doesn't have that excess. I mean, the what's become a meme now, the con when he screams con, I get how ridiculous that looks in just a meme, but in the film, you know what? It's great. It works.
And it's a little bit of theater too, because he knows that the Enterprise is coming, but he's not stranded there. The Enterprise is coming back for them in 2 hours. So he is certainly channeling his frustration and rage over everything that's happening, but he's also kind of putting it on, as Kirk is wont to do, to deceive his enemies. So but it's funny that gets pulled out as the thing from the film.
One thing people don't talk about, and it's only a small part of this show, but part of this film, I mean, a minuscule part of this film, but it is particularly in the first season of the original series, part and parcel of Kirk's character is that every single death around him impacts him. He is in that first season of the original series, when a security guard dies, he is in agony. Yeah. He feels responsible for his crew. And during that exchange with Khan, he starts up by saying, "You managed to kill just about everybody else here." But the truth of that, it's gone in a flash, but it is that these deaths impact Kirk.
Yeah.
Right. He wasn't responsible for well, I mean, he may feel responsible for the attack on Regula because he's the one who stranded Khan. And does Khan have a point too? I think that's interesting too. Khan says he never thought to check on our progress. I don't know that Kirk was the guy to check on your progress because he's a starship captain out and about, maybe nowhere near where you are, but you would think Starfleet. So the question arises, did they tell the Federation? Did they tell Starfleet Command that they had done this? That's a good question too. I actually had never really thought about that, but Kirk never checked on on Khan and his people's progress because not really his job. But you would think that he would have checked had he not informed Starfleet Command or the Federation. And if he had informed both or either, you would think that the Federation or Starfleet Command would, maybe, every now and again check on what's going on.
Sure.
It's also interesting that Kirk's solution is not to execute, not to jail these people who are refugees from another time, but also still essentially villains, wannabe dictators. But it's still to not rob them of their lives.
Yeah.
It's an interesting choice.
Yeah. What if we plant this seed and, plant it in good ground, what will grow? Of course, he doesn't know that the ground is bad and the seed will grow rank. But that's the danger.
Yeah. Yes. Always that. Yes.
Well, I mean, we could sing the praises of this film all day long, but was there anything else that you wanted to say about the film before we wrap up?
I'm probably going to think of 500 things right after we get off the phone, but there are so many good aspects of this film. And I think we've covered a lot of them. And I think at a base level, the most important thing for me, certainly as somebody who enjoys film, is that this is not just good Star Trek. It is good Star Trek, but it's a good film. It's a good film. And as a Star Trek fan, there are Star Trek films out there that I would never encourage somebody who did not love Star Trek to watch. There are Star Trek films out there that I wouldn't encourage Star Trek fans to watch. But I would have no problem recommending The Wrath of Khan to anybody, regardless of their knowledge or appreciation for Star Trek. I mean, even people who sort of don't like Star Trek for whatever reason, I would say, you know what, you can watch this film.
Well, of course, in my future this year, I'll be watching Star Trek Into Darkness, the dark side of this story, and so we'll see how my bulliance holds up with that. But yeah,
I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to listen to that podcast for sure.
Okay.
I want to hear that. I want to hear your perspective on that. Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be interesting.
Well, this has been great, and thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. And if people want to continue the conversation, they can at EISTPOD on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page. But where can people find you online?
Well, you already mentioned my website, which is drgiii.com. I also have movie reviews by george.com. And I have to admit, you would think during a pandemic in which I was largely relegated to staying at home, I would have kept both of those sites up, but I really haven't for whatever reason. But I do need to get back to those. And certainly people can reach me through those sites if they have any questions, comments, vague misgivings. They can reach me through there.
Well, thanks again for talking with me, and we're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed. Backtracking is back for an all-new season. Hi, I'm Caliban.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
And we'd like to introduce you to Backtracking, the podcast that explores the real-world inspirations behind your favorite episodes of Star Trek.
From historical events to classical literature to blockbuster films, we go where no pod has gone before to seek out the origins of classic Trek tales.
Did you know, Gooey, that the TNG episode Too Short a Season was an allegory for the Iran-Contra affair?
Yeah, only sweatier. Did you know that the Enterprise episode Regeneration was an homage to the John Carpenter film The Thing?
Archer and T'Pol freezing to death over a bottle of whiskey would have been a controversial ending.
As a dog lover, Archer would not like The Thing, I'm guessing.
Oh my god, movie night is canceled. Join us every other Thursday for a journey back to the beginnings of the Trek universe.
Backtracking is available wherever you get your podcasts.
No, Porthos!